Have you ever, just casually swiped your card for a coffee or tapped your phone and, well, thought nothing of it? It feels so simple, almost automatic. But what if I told you that seemingly tiny transaction is just the tip of the iceberg, that underneath is this deeply complex, often hidden system?
Oh, absolutely. It's a system that's evolved over millennia. And it fundamentally shapes not just your spending, but global power, whole societies, even our individual freedoms.
Right. Most of us use money constantly, but we rarely stop and think, what is this stuff, fundamentally? It can feel pretty overwhelming.
It can, but when you start peeling back the layers, it's honestly full of these fascinating insights. You get these aha moments about how the world really operates.
Exactly. And that's our mission today on the Deep Dive. We're going to unpack this surprising evolution of money. We'll go from ancient ledgers all the way to modern digital currencies. And we're drawing on some incredible sources, including insights from Lyn Alden's Broken Money.
And central to this whole deep dive is one sort of key question, a question that echoes through history. Who controls the ledger? Because the answer to that has dramatically shaped wealth, governance, and freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. So get ready for some hopefully genuine insights, maybe some surprising history, and just a bit more clarity on something so vital. Let's dive in.
Okay, so first things first. The absolute core concept we need to grasp is that money, at its most basic level, is a ledger.
A ledger, so like a record. Who owes what to whom, or who has how much of something.
Precisely. Think about really early human societies, small groups, mostly kin. And they didn't really need formal money. If you helped your neighbor or they shared food with you, it was all tracked informally, kind of a mental or oral ledger.
Like a social credit system almost.
Exactly. It was fluid, based on trust and memory. It solved that double coincidence of wants problem pretty easily within the group. You didn't need your apples matched perfectly with their tools right then and there. You just built up social capital.
Okay, so that works fine in a small, tight-knit community. But I guess as groups got bigger, started trading with strangers, or maybe settled down with farming, that's when the informal system breaks down.
Absolutely. Once you're dealing with outsiders or managing surpluses over seasons, you need something more concrete, something liquid, easily divisible, portable, and crucially, widely accepted by people you don't necessarily trust implicitly. You need a universal accounting unit. And this is where what our sources call nature's ledger starts to emerge.
Nature's ledger, I like that. So commodity money, what made certain things good candidates back then?
Well, a few key properties. It had to be durable, obviously. Fungible, meaning one unit is just like any other unit. Verifiable, so you could easily check it was real. And maybe most importantly, it had to be scarce. Its supply couldn't suddenly balloon, especially once people started valuing it.
Right, because if anyone could just make tons of it, it wouldn't hold value.
Yeah.
What are some cool examples? I know some, but others are wild.
Oh, definitely. On the North American Pacific coast, you had dentalium shells traded way inland. On the Atlantic coast, wampum, those polished clamshells, were super labor-intensive to make. Other tribes, even the colonists, used them as money.
Wow.
Cowrie shells were huge in parts of Africa and Asia for centuries. Even things like ostrich egg beads, strings of teeth. Or, jumping way forward, think about online games like Diablo 2. That Stone of Jordan ring became the currency, purely because it was rare and desirable for trade. It just shows how a highly saleable good naturally emerges.
It's fascinating how something starts useful or symbolic and then gets this extra monetary premium just because people save it. But you mentioned scarcity. Some commodities failed on that front.
Many did. That monetary premium creates a huge incentive. Hey, this thing is valuable, let's make more. Only things that are really hard to produce more of can withstand that pressure. Tobacco in the American South is a classic example.
Oh.
It worked as money for a bit, but that premium led to massive overplanting, inflation. The government even tried to burn crops to create scarcity, but it just didn't work. Tobacco wasn't naturally scarce enough.
And the race stones of Yap, those huge stone discs, they had a great stock-to-flow ratio initially, right?
Yeah.
High existing supply compared to new production.
They did, which made them good money for Yap. But then comes this Irishman, David O'Keefe, in the late 1800s. He shows up with modern tools, boats. Suddenly, he can quarry and transport these massive stones way more easily than the locals ever could.
So he basically flooded the market.
Pretty much. He became the richest guy, commanding labor and goods, but he totally destabilized their system. Technology broke nature's ledger in that case. the stones lost their monetary power.
That story also kind of busts the myth of hunter-gatherer societies being perfectly equal, doesn't
As
it?
it does. Our sources point out that even then you had prestige goods, things requiring specialized skills to make. These created scarcity, and yes, wealth inequality definitely existed. It wasn't always some flat egalitarian utopia.
Okay, so shells, stones, tobacco. They had limits. How did gold and silver end up dominating for so long?
They just had the best combination of those key properties, especially scarcity. Their stock-to-flow ratios were incredibly high and remained high even as technology got better. Plus, they were widely desired, super durable, easy to melt down and reshape, portable, divisible. They just ticked all the boxes better than anything else.
And they could handle that monetary premium we keep mentioning.
Exactly. The incentive to mine more was always there, but it's just hard to get significant new amounts of gold and silver out of the ground relative to what already exists. They could withstand that pressure without becoming totally diluted.
And wasn't there a famous scientist who accidentally gave gold a boost?
Huh. Yeah, Sir Isaac Newton. When he was master of the mint in England around 1717, he set the official silver to gold price ratio too low.
Meaning silver was undervalued.
Right, so people effectively hoarded gold and spent the undervalued silver or melted it down. Silver coins basically disappeared from circulation. Gold became dominant in Britain, and then through the British Empire, the gold standard spread worldwide. Kind of an accidental consequence.
Wow. And even now, gold holds this global recognition, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. You can take gold almost anywhere in the world and sell it pretty easily near the market price. It's still a globally recognized bearer asset, dense value storage outside the formal financial system.
That's pretty powerful. But even gold has physical limitations, especially for, fast, large-scale trade, which leads us to formal credit in banks.
Indeed. The need for more efficient ways to track and transfer value over distance was always there. We see early glimpses in things like the Code of Hammurabi in Babylon nearly 4,000 years ago, laws about loans, deposits.
But what about systems that cross borders? I was fascinated by the Hawala system mentioned in the sources.
Oh, Hawala. It's such a great example of a decentralized trust network. Goes way back, 8th century. Silk Road merchants, both Muslim and Jewish traders used it. You had these brokers, hawaladars, operating purely on reputation. You'd give money to one in, say Baghdad,
Uh-huh.
and their trusted counterpart in, maybe, Pyro, would pay out the recipient. No actual money cross borders initially. They'd settle up between themselves later, netting out the payments across their network.
Like an ancient trust-based Venmo or something.
Yeah.
And it's still used today for remittances.
It is, completely bypassing formal banks. It really shows how money could move and who controlled the ledger, in this case, the network of trusted hawaladars. It wasn't a state or a king, it was the network itself.
Fascinating. But for formal institutions, the big game changer was standardizing how they kept their ledgers, right? Yeah. Double-entry bookkeeping.
That was huge. Luca Pacioli's book in 1494, Summa de Arithmetica, didn't invent it. We know similar methods were used by Islamic merchants and had roots even earlier, but he codified and popularized it across Europe. It revolutionized business accounting.
Okay, so we have gold, we have early credit, we have better accounting. The next massive leap was moving from holding physical gold to holding paper claims on gold.
Exactly. Banknotes, paper receipts saying, this note is good for X amount of gold. It made gold way more convenient, more portable, liquid, divisible, just easier to use. But it also introduced counterparty risk. You had to trust the bank would actually have the gold.
Which naturally led to the banks thinking, maybe we don't need all the gold here all the time. Fractional reserves.
Bingo. The musical chairs analogy is perfect. Banks realized, hey, not everyone asks for their gold back at once, so they started keeping only a fraction of the gold reserves and lent out the rest, creating more paper claims than actual gold.
Seems inherently unstable.
It is. It works fine until the music stops. If there's a panic and everyone rushes to get their gold, the bank runs out. Boom, bank run.
And modern banks today run on even thinner reserves, right? And the reserves aren't even physical cash most of the time, just digital entries at the central bank.
Precisely. Leverage is often 5x, 10x, or even higher. And their liquid cash is mostly central bank reserves, an abstract concept. So the control of the ledger really shifted here.
Also,
Well, in a pure gold system, nature controlled scarcity, and individuals held the asset. In a free banking system with gold backing, maybe nature and individual banks shared control, but once central banks step in and start managing reserves, they increasingly control the ledger. It becomes more abstract, further removed from physical metal.
and governments actively push this, right? Like the U.S. in the 30s.
Oh, definitely. In 1933, the U.S. government literally outlawed private ownership of most gold. Americans had to turn it in. Then, in 1934, they devalued the dollar against gold, changing the price from about $20 an ounce to $35 an ounce overnight.
Which effectively meant.
It was a massive wealth transfer. People who held dollars lost purchasing power relative to gold. The government, being the biggest debtor, benefited hugely. It was a default towards the public, taking value from savers. And it paved the way for less transparent inflation and more financial surveillance down the line.
That's a huge shift in who controls the ledger.
Mm-hmm.
And then, 1971, the final break from gold entirely. The pure fiat era begins globally.
Unprecedented. For the first time, basically the whole world was using money backed by nothing tangible, just government decree. Previous fiat experiments were localized and usually ended badly. This was global.
So how did the US dollar keep its top spot without gold backing? The source mentions the petrodollar deal as key.
Ah, yes. This is really crucial and often overlooked. In 1974, a deal was struck, largely in secret, between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. The Saudis agreed to price all their oil exports only in U.S. dollars, and importantly, they'd invest their huge oil profits, their petrodollar surpluses, back into U.S. Treasury bonds.
So that created a constant global demand for dollars to buy oil.
Exactly. It effectively backed the dollar not with gold, but with oil, the world's most important commodity. It ensured the dollar remained the primary global reserve and settlement asset. Every time you fill your tank, you're participating in the system. It keeps the dollar strong, influencing everything from import costs to investment flows. A hidden hand, really.
So the most powerful country basically dictates the world's ledger. Convenient for trade, maybe, but it came with costs, even for the U.S.
Absolutely. That strong dollar, driven by global demand, made U.S. exports more expensive. It contributed to persistent trade deficits and the hollowing out of American manufacturing. The U.S. consumed more than it produced, financed by the world needing its currency.
And for developing nations, it sounds like it was often a raw deal.
Often, yes. Many took on debt denominated in dollars. When the dollar strengthened, their debt burden exploded, leading to crises. Then the IMF, largely influenced by wealthy nations, would step in with rescue packages, but with strings attached.
Like demanding currency devaluation.
Right, or forcing open markets in ways that benefited multinational corporations and local elites, sometimes keeping wages suppressed. Our sources call it neo-colonialist trade relationships. Think about Madagascar still owing debt to France from colonial times, or the CFA franc zone in Africa, where France essentially controls their currency and holds their reserves. It shows how monetary control is real geopolitical power.
It paints a pretty grim picture. And this fiat system also made financing things like war much less transparent, didn't it?
Oh, dramatically.
Yeah.
Look at Britain in World War I. The government and the Bank of England basically printed money secretly to pay for the war. Citizens' savings lost over half their value. The Financial Times even had to correct a 1914 report decades later, admitting war bonds weren't oversubscribed as they'd claimed. It was all hidden inflation.
Lenin's quote about debauching the currency comes to mind.
No subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society. It's potent. And we saw echoes in the U.S. post 9/11.
Credit card wars.
Right. Unlike, say, World War II, where taxes were raised significantly, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan costing trillions, like $5.8 trillion cumulative by 2022 for Iraq alone, were funded almost entirely by debt and printing money. The cost was abstracted away from the public. Defense contractors did very well, though.
And the Federal Reserve's actions in recent crises, like 2008 and 2020, seem to fit this pattern of abstracting away consequences.
Very much so. In 2008, the Fed massively expanded its balance sheet to bail out the banks, preventing collapse but socializing losses. In 2020, during the COVID crash, interest rates went to zero, huge amounts of liquidity were pumped in. Remember Fed Chair Powell saying they weren't even thinking about raising rates, even with inflation already climbing past 6%?
Yeah, that was memorable.
These actions prevented immediate disaster, sure, but they fueled later inflation and clearly benefited asset holders disproportionately. Look at the Paycheck Protection Program. A lot of that money didn't go where intended. The top 1% saw way more wealth gain than the bottom 50%. Prudent businesses that hadn't taken on huge debt were effectively punished relative to leveraged ones that got bailed out.
It feels like kicking the can down the road, contributing to this long-term debt cycle the sources talk about.
And that cycle is ancient. Babylonian kings forgiving debts, Solon in Athens. Societies have always grappled with debt buildups. The modern difference is that policy interventions constantly prevent real deleveraging. Instead, we get Financial repression, inflating away debt, using capital controls. The 1940s post-WWII era is a key example. Huge government debt was essentially transferred to savers via inflation.
But can that work again now, with even higher debt levels and aging populations?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question. It's much harder. Our sources talk about financial entropy, the system's promises become increasingly detached from reality, essentially printed rather than earned, pulling demand from the future into the present. It feels unsustainable.
Which perfectly sets the stage for something radically different. Internet-native money, something outside government control.
And it brings us back to Friedrich Hayek, the Nobel laureate, who said way back in 1984, something like, "We won't get good money again until we take it out of government hands. We need some sly, roundabout way to introduce something they can't stop."
Wow, prophetic. What were the early steps towards that before Bitcoin?
There were important precursors. Adam Back's Hashcash in '97 using proof of work to fight email spam. Nick Szabo's ideas around BitGold, Hal Finney's reusable proof of work in 2004, they were building the conceptual blocks.
And then, boom, 2008. Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper, Bitcoin arrives. What was the core idea?
Freedom, peer-to-peer electronic cash, no intermediaries. Bitcoin is essentially a distributed public ledger, sometimes called triple entry bookkeeping.
Triple entry.
Yeah, instead of just two parties keeping their own records, double entry,
Wow.
every transaction is broadcast, verified by the network, and added to a shared immutable chain. It's radically transparent. Anyone can run the software, validate transactions, participate without permission.
And key features are that fixed supply, 21 million coins ever, and self-custody, right? You hold your own keys.
Exactly. The fixed supply, enforced by code, and that declining block subsidy, the halving every 4 years, makes it digitally scarce. And self-custody gives you true ownership, monetary self-sovereignty. It's designed to be censorship-resistant, globally portable value transfer.
Okay, but what about scaling? Critics always hammer Bitcoin on its low transaction speed and high energy use per transaction.
That energy per transaction argument is misleading. It's like saying a lighthouse uses too much energy per ship it guides. The energy secures the entire network, the whole history, making it incredibly robust. It's a fixed security cost, largely independent of how many transactions happen on the base layer. Think of it like a global settlement network security budget.
So the base layer isn't meant for buying coffee.
Not primarily, no. It's for large, important final settlements, like Fed wires for banks. For smaller, faster payments, you have Layer 2 solutions, most notably the Lightning Network.
Right, Lightning, built on top of Bitcoin.
Exactly. Enabled by an upgrade called SegWit in 2017. Think of it like opening a tab at a bar. You open a payment channel with someone, transact back and forth instantly, almost for free, off the main chain. Then you settle the net result on the main Bitcoin blockchain only when you close the channel.
So that allows for micropayments, billions of transactions.
Potentially, yes. It makes things like streaming money or even machine-to-machine payments feasible. Imagine AI programs paying each other tiny amounts of Bitcoin for data or processing power. It scales transaction volume dramatically.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the security model, proof of work versus proof of stake. Why is that distinction important?
It's fundamental. Bitcoin's proof of work uses real-world energy expenditure as the anchor for truth. It creates a history with unforgeable costliness. You have to burn energy to mine blocks. It's objective, permissionless, anyone can try to mine. It makes the network incredibly hard to capture or censor long-term.
Where proof of stake.
Proof-of-stake systems rely on existing coin holders, stakers, to validate transactions. The more coins you have, the more power you have. It's a kind of circular logic. The rich validate the system that keeps them rich. This concentration makes POS networks potentially permanently capturable if a wealthy group decides to collude or censor. It lacks that external anchor to physical reality.
So Bitcoin's energy use isn't a bug, it's actually a feature for security and decentralization.
That's the argument, yes. And the narrative around energy consumption is often overblown. Those predictions from 2017 about Bitcoin boiling the oceans, off by orders of magnitude? More importantly, Bitcoin mining often uses energy that would otherwise be wasted.
Like flared natural gas.
Exactly, or excess renewable energy that grids can't use when demand is low. Electricity isn't perfectly fungible, location matters. Bitcoin miners are unique. They are geographically flexible, interruptible buyers of last resort for cheap, stranded energy. There are amazing examples like Gridless using Bitcoin mining to fund small hydro dams in rural Africa, literally bringing power and connectivity to remote villages.
Wow, that's counterintuitive, turning waste energy into economic activity.
Right. And the heat generated by miners can be captured and used productively, heating homes, greenhouses, swimming pools. It's evolving quickly.
So this technology offers potential tools for financial freedom. But at the same time, we're living through this massive erosion of privacy, aren't we?
It's stark. JFK warned about diminishing rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights guarantees privacy. Yet technology has made surveillance incredibly cheap and pervasive.
Hmm.
Google, Equifax breaches, NSA's PRISM, Pegasus spyware, China's exporting AI surveillance. It's everywhere.
And governments always find a pretext.
Always. The war on drugs, war on terror, war on trafficking. There's always a justification for increasing surveillance and control over financial transactions. Think about France banning cash purchases over €1,000. It's the same pattern we saw with pagers in the 80s. New tech gets used by bad actors, calls for bans arise, but powerful tech is hard to suppress.
So in this environment, what's the defense?
Asymmetric defense, strong encryption, and decentralized money. It's the cypherpunk vision. Cypherpunks write code. Software is resilient. Widely distributed systems are hard to shut down. Bitcoin and stablecoins running on similar rails offer tools to resist debasement, censorship, seizure. They offer pathways to monetary self-sovereignty.
Does this actually work in practice, though? Beyond the theory?
Absolutely. Real-world examples are powerful. Roya Maboob paying Afghan women programmers in Bitcoin back in 2013, money their male relatives couldn't just take.
I remember reading about that.
Alexei Navalny's anti-corruption group in Russia using Bitcoin donations when their bank accounts were frozen. Nigerian #EndSARS protesters using it when the government shut down their funding. It provides a lifeline when traditional financial rails are closed off.
But governments are fighting back, trying to regulate this space heavily.
Of course. You see things like the proposed U.S. bill trying to classify open-source wallet developers as money transmitters, which seems unworkable. It's relatively easy to regulate the on-ramps and off-ramps, the exchanges, the banks. But it's incredibly hard to stop peer-to-peer usage or self-custody. How do you stop someone generating a private key by, as the source mentions, flipping a coin 256 times?
And the Canadian trucker protests were a wake-up call for many, even in a democracy.
A huge one. Seeing bank accounts frozen for supporting a protest, even without specific charges for many. It forced people to consider self-custodial options like Bitcoin. It highlighted that financial censorship isn't just a risk in authoritarian states. These tools help ensure governments have to follow due process.
It's a real tension. On one side, this push for decentralized self-sovereign money, and on the other, the rise of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Seems like the polar opposite.
Exactly. CBDCs represent the ultimate centralization of the ledger. Many policymakers see them as a way to finally phase out physical cash and gain more control. Remember that IMF paper suggesting how to make negative interest rates work? A cashless CBDC world makes that technically feasible. Your digital money could just shrink in your account.
Is anyone actually trying this?
Nigeria launched its Naira CBDC. But adoption has been tiny, less than 1%, even when the central bank tried to force it by restricting physical cash withdrawals. People just switched to peer-to-peer crypto instead. It showed massive public resistance to that level of control.
And central bankers like Christine Lagarde at the ECB have been pretty open about wanting control.
Yes, the control aspect is often explicitly stated, and the potential for surveillance and social engineering is, well, chilling.
Like what?
Imagine automated controls based on your behavior. A message saying your social credit score is too low, so you can only spend within 5 miles of home. Or you've hit your carbon quota, no more meat or plane tickets for you this month. Or your account is frozen because AI flagged your online posts as problematic or linked you to a protest. It sounds Orwellian, but the technological capability is there with a programmable, centralized ledger.
Wow. So this whole deep dive really brings us back to that fundamental question. Who controls the ledger? We've seen it swing from informal social networks to nature via commodities, then to banks, and increasingly to nation-states and central banks controlling abstract fiat ledgers.
And now we're seeing the emergence of a potential counterforce, decentralized internet-native ledgers like Bitcoin, alongside the push for even more centralized CBDC ledgers. It's a fascinating moment.
A real pendulum swing, as you said, between centralized and decentralized control, each with massive implications for everything from economic stability to basic human rights like privacy and freedom of transaction.
Technology keeps changing the landscape, the tools, the possibilities.
So the final thought for you, the listener, is this. As these technologies battle for the future of money, what kind of system do you want to live under? Do you lean towards the potential convenience and perceived stability of centralized control, accepting the risks of surveillance and censorship? Or do you value individual sovereignty and freedom more, even if it means embracing the complexities and volatility of decentralized self-custodial systems? There are real trade-offs, and the choices being made right now will profoundly shape the world we inhabit.